The Friday Everything Changed by Anhart. Tradition in Miss Ralston's class, the boys have always carried the water bucket. Until one day, the girl decide it's time to challenge the rule. The last hour of school on Friday afternoons was for Junior Red Cross. The little kids would get out their Junior Red Cross pins and put them on. And us big kids would start elbowing down the aisles to the book cupboard at the back to see who would get the interesting magazines. There was a big pile of them, and they were of two kinds, the National Geographic and the Junior Red Cross News. Because the boys were stronger and sat near at the back, they usually got the National Geographic first, which meant they could spend the rest of Red Cross looking at African ladies wearing nothing on top, while us girls had to be satisfied with the Junior Red Cross News, which showed little African kids wearing lots of clothes and learning how to read. Apart from the magazine for the big kids and maybe the teacher reading a story to the little kids. About the only other things that happened regularly during Red Cross was picking the two boys who would carry the water the next week. So, every Friday afternoon towards the end of Red Cross, when it got to be the time for the teacher to pick the two boys who would go for the water the next week. All the National Geographic came to rest like huge butterfly folding up their yellow wings, and the big hash fell all over the back rows. And that's the way it had always been until one extraordinary afternoon when right out of the blue, just after the teacher had picked Ernie Chapman and Garnet Dixon to carry the water, my seatmate, Alma Niles, put up her hand and said, "Why can't girls go for the water too?" Now our teacher that year was named Miss Ralston, and even though she came from River Hebert, we all like her quite a lot. Room before our very eyes, and even the little kids could see that it really hurt. Things had settled down. The boys kind of admired Miss Ralston for strapping so hard, and as girls admired her because she was so pretty and wore nylon stockings and loafer all the time. But the really unusual thing about Miss Ralston was the way she sometimes stopped in the middle of a lesson and looked up us if we were real people, instead of just a lot of kids who had to be pushed through their next grades. And that was why, on that Friday afternoon when Alma Niles put up her hand and said, "Why can't girls go for the water too?" We all turned and looked at Miss Ralston first instead of just bursting out laughing at Alma right away. And Miss Ralston, instead of saying, "Whoever heard of girls going for the water?" Or, "Are you trying to be saucy, Alma?" like any other teacher would, said nothing at all for a moment but just looked very hard at Alma, who had gone quite white with the shocks of dropping such a bombshell. After a long moment when she finally spoke, Miss Ralston, instead of saying, "Why, that's out of the question, Alma," threw a bombshell of her own. "I'll think about that," she said, as if, you know, she would. "And I'll let you know next Friday." For the rest of that weekend, though of course we never talk about in front of our parents, all we could think of both boys and girls was what going to happen at school that coming week. The first thing clearly evident by recess on Monday morning was that the boys had decided not to let us girls field of softball anymore. Softball at our school used to go like this. Every Monday morning at recess, two of the bigger boys that year, it was usually Ernie Chapman and Junior LeBlanc, used to pick up their teams for the week. Some days it got so exciting that at noon we couldn't wait to eat our lunch but would rush straight into the schoolyard, gobbling our sandwiches as we ran. Towards that aching moment when the ball snacking across the yellow grass of arching toward us from the March sky might meet up our open, eager hands. So, it was a hard blow. Monday morning recess when Ernie Chapman whirled the bat around his head, slammed it down as hard as he could on home base and announced, "The first girl that goes out to the field, we break her neck." We clustered forlornly around the girls' entry door knowing there was nothing we could really do. "Oh, Alma," mourned Minnie Halliday, beating the end of her long brown braids, "why couldn't you just have kept your mouth shut?" It was a bad moment. If we tried to go out to the field, They have picked us one by one. We couldn't even play softball on our own. None of us owned a bat and a ball. If it hadn't been for Doris Pomeroy, we might have broken rank right there and then. Doris, who was in grade 9 and had a home permanent and sometimes wore nail polish and had even it rumored gone swimming in the quarry all alone with Alton Lawrence. Flick a rock against the schoolhouse wall in the silence following Minnie's remark and steadied us all by saying, "Don't be foolish, Minnie. All we have to do is to wait. They need us to field, and besides, they kind of like to have us out there looking at them when they get up to bat." As for Alma, who kept getting notes thrown on her desk, promising her everything from a bloody nose to having her pants pulled down, we stuck to her like burrs. But maybe Alma's hardest moment had nothing to do with the bullying at all. It was where her cousin Arnold came over to see her on Wednesday after school and asked her to drop the whole idea of girls going for the water. If they find out about it, Alma, said Arnold, they'll probably take away the water bucket. Who's they? Asked Alma. She and Arnold had played a lot together when they were little kids, and she used to listening to his opinion on most things. Well, the health inspector, said Arnold. And guys like that, they never take away the water bucket, said Alma, though she wasn't all that sure. They don't care who carries the water as long as it gets carried, Alma, said Arnold earnestly. The other guy would kill me if they were find out I told you this, but sometimes carrying the water isn't that much fun. On cold days, it's real hard work. You're better off in this warm school. Alma knew what it cost Arnold to tell her this, but she stood firm. I'm sorry, Arnold, she said, but I'm used to cold weather. In winter, I walk to school the same as you. So Arnold went away. If Miss Ralston, as the week wore on, noticed anything unusual going on in her school, she gave little sign of it. She passed out the usual punishment for ink balls. She intercepted threatening notes and tore them up unread. She looked at Alma's white face, and all she asked about were the principal rivers of Europe. Nor were we surprised. Nothing in our experience had led us to believe the grown-ups had the slightest inkling of interest in what really went on with kids. Only Doris Pomeroy thought differently. Miss Ralston looks real mad, said Doris as we trailed in thankful from Friday morning recess. Mad? A couple of us asked. Yeah, like when she come off the ring bell and we're all hanging around the entry door like a lot of scared chickens. She rings the old handbell as if she wished all those yelling boys' head were under it. Of course, they do things differently in River Heber. I know for a fact that girls will get to play on softball teams just like the boys. On teams? Just like the boys? But it was all too much for us to take it at that moment. So, si preoccupied were we with the afternoon's decision on the water. All that long hard week, it was as Friday afternoon, and the Junior Red Cross would never come again. Now, that is was almost upon us most as forget. In her excitements, at least for the time being, Doris had a remark about softball. So at lunchtime, just as the boys were winding up their week's game, and real great, eh? Without the girls, Ernie Chapman was gloating loudly from the pitcher's mound. When Miss Ralston, without her bell, leaped through our clustered huddles and entered the door and headed straight towards the softball field. She took us all completely by surprise. Crunch, crunch, crunch went Miss Ralston's bright red loafers against the cinders, and the next thing we knew, she grabbed the bat from Irving Snell and, squinting against the sun, was twirling and lining it before our astonished eyes. Come on, cried Miss Ralston impatiently to Ernie, who stood transfixed before her on the pitcher's mound. Come on, she cried again, and she banged the bat against the ground. Come on, cried Doris Pomeroy, and we rushed after her across the cinders. The first ball Ernie threw was pretty wobbly, and Miss Ralston hit it an angle so that it fell sideways, a foul ball, towards George Fowler's outstretched hands. Ah! We moaned from the sidelines and some of us closed our eyes so we wouldn't have to look. But George jumped too eagerly for such an easy ball and it fell right through his fingers and rolled harmlessly along the ground. Ernie took a lot of more time over his head pitch. He was getting over the first shock of finding Miss Ralston opposite him at bat and by this time, he was receiving shouts of encouragement from all over the field. Get her! Get her! The boys yelled recklessly in Ernie and they all found out behind the bases. Ernie took aim slowly. None of us had ever seen the pictures of professionals' pitchers, but there was a certain awesome ceremony. Nevertheless, as Ernie spat savagely on the ball, glared hard at Miss Ralston, he slowly swung back his big right arm and poised for one long moment. His whole body outstretched, threw the ball as hard as he could towards home base where Miss Ralston waited, her body rocking with the bat. For a fleeting moment, we had a glimpse of what life might be like in Riri Hebert, and then Miss Ralston hit the ball. Ah! We cried as it rose high in the air, borne by the marsh wind, and flew like a bird against the sun, across the road and out of the sight, into the ox pasture on the other side. Ah! We all stared at Miss Ralston, "School's in," she announced over her shoulder, walking away. Hitting the ball into the ox pastures happened maybe once a year. That afternoon, towards the end of the Red Cross, there was a big hush all over the room. "Next week," said Miss Ralston, closing the school register, tidying her books. "Next week, Alma Niles and Joyce Shipley will go for the water." She swept her hand over the top of her desk and the tiny dust motes danced in the slanting sun.